Tonight, what I will tell you is not rumor. Tonight, I will tell you what I have seen and what I have heard myself. And I will tell you about Clonard, the attack which was made on Clonard, because I know that Clonard is very dear to the hearts of every man present here tonight. We remember, my dearest men, I don't suppose we'll forget it easily, the night of Thursday, the 14th of August. We remember that night and the early hours of the following morning when the Falls Road area was devastated by gunfire and by petrol bombs. During long periods that night and during the early hours of the morning, I was standing at a 4th-story window in the monastery here in Clonard, looking out on the scene of desolation. And as I saw the leaping flames reddening the sky, and the machine gun fire breaking the silence of the night, I found myself asking this question: is it possible that only 2 or 3 days ago we were assured by Stormont spokesmen that the forces of law and order had everything completely under control? Like very many others in the locality, I did not retire to bed that night. I stayed up the whole time, said the 6:30 Mass the following morning, and immediately after the Mass, I was just taking off the vestments in the sacristy, a distress call came. A message saying that they were dragging people from their homes in a nearby street. This was 7 o'clock in the morning, 15th of August. So I hastened to the spot to find 2 police vehicles drawn up on the street. And one of them, as far as I know, is a tender. I'm not an expert in these things. The other, I don't know what it was. It was some kind of armored vehicle with a large gun mounted on it. And as I approached, there was a middle-aged man dressed in shirt and trousers with hands raised, standing on the pavement, and he was being searched or questioned by the police. Whether they were regular police or B specials, don't ask me, I can't distinguish between them. But the man was being questioned anyway, and as I approached, the questioning or the searching discontinued. I stood there watching closely, and while I stood there, passers-by, some on their way to Mass and some to work, hastened their steps when they saw the police vehicles. I saluted some of them, but they were obviously frightened at the sight of the tenders and the police, and they showed a great reluctance to enter into conversation with me. With one exception, a lady stood chatting, and this lady deplored the violence that was taking place in the city, and she expressed a fervent hope that peace would soon be restored and that a spirit of neighborliness would prevail. This lady was a Protestant from nearby Cooper Street. While I was there, the police took 2 men into custody, ordered them into the tender, and I did not see any evidence of violence. While I was there anyway, there was no force or violence used. When the police vehicles moved off, the doors of the houses opened one by one, and the people came onto the street. And a group of women remonstrated with me for having exposed myself to what they called grave danger of being shot. You know, they insisted these B specials would shoot you. Well, my dearest men, I don't believe there was the slightest danger of my being shot. But afterwards, when I thought on that remark, I was appalled to think that this is typical of the lack of confidence which so many of our people have in the forces of law and order. Later that morning, Friday morning, a voice on the telephone warned the community in Clonard that they had better clear out or they'd be burned out. We didn't clear out and we're still here. But anyway, the message came across, and a priest in the monastery that you know only too well, not myself, brought this message to the local police station. He phoned the message to them, and they promised protection, but no help came. At 3 o'clock on Friday afternoon, the trouble really started. When a large mob, I think no other word would describe them, a large mob advanced from the Cooper Street area. I do not say for a moment that they were residents of Cooper Street. I do say they came from that area, armed with stones and sticks and petrol bombs. At that time, I didn't see any other instrument, but they advanced on the Catholic areas. At this particular time of day, 3 o'clock approximately, as you would expect, the men of the area were away at work. So the defense of the place was left to a handful of teenagers, and they did a great job. We were proud of them. They hurled every missile they could lay their hands on into the faces of the advancing assailants. They did a good job. An urgent phone message went out from Clonard Monastery to the local police station, asking for protection for the threatened area. The call was received politely, but no help came. After making a vain attempt to stop the fighting down there at the junction of Cooper Street, I heard a number of women and girls panicking. They were shrieking and crying all over the place. So I directed them to the monastery. I went with them, brought them in through the kitchen into the monastery, where a large number of people had already gathered. Indeed, the people were all over the place. They were up the stairs, they were in rooms where I certainly never saw a female in my life. They were every place. It was open house. It was a time of emergency. It was at this stage that I heard the first shots ringing out. And moments later, looking through a window in the monastery, I saw a prostrate figure on the pavement below. The exact spot is at the lamppost, which is directly opposite the old credit union offices in Waterville Street. The body was lying there in Waterville Street on the pavement, just across the road from the old credit union offices. I dashed down the stairs at once onto the street. A man had arrived there before me, one I think, I wasn't sure of that. I looked into the face of the boy whom I didn't recognize at the time. It was Gerard Macaulay. And Gerard was still conscious. He opened his eyes, and I did think that he showed signs of recognition as he looked at me. I gave him absolution. I anointed him. I helped to put him on a lorry. Just at that stage, an ambulance arrived, and we got him onto the ambulance, and I was told afterwards that he died on the way to hospital. That was sometime between 4 and 5 o'clock in the evening. And at this time, a father from the monastery, accompanied by a layman from the locality, went to visit the local police station, appealing for help. There were a number of police officers sitting around. They said their orders were to remain in barracks. News of the attack spread like wildfire, the attack on the Clonard area. And men came speeding from their work to protect their homes and protect their families and protect their church. And goodness knows they had very, very little with which to protect themselves. Comparatively speaking, you could say the men in this area were defenseless, comparatively speaking. Within the space of 1 hour, I anointed 5 people out there on the road. Fearing a real massacre, I got on the phone, and I had to go across the roadway to do it because our own phone was out of order. I got on the phone with the GCO headquarters of the British forces in Lisburn. The GCO was not available, but the officer who took the call said he would do his best to help. And at about 7 o'clock in the evening, the first group of soldiers arrived, and they marched through Clonard Street, Clonard Gardens, and took up their position down in the Falls Road. Now you will understand that soldiers in the Falls Road are pretty useless as far as protecting the Clonard area is concerned when you are being attacked from the rear, as we were, from the Cooper Street area. So I sped down to the Falls Road. I met the officer in charge of the soldiers. I tried to explain the position to him. He said he had his orders, and being a military man, of course, he had to take them, I suppose, but I must admit that at a time like this, when you see a boy being murdered, when you see people, defenseless people being shot down and the houses burned over their heads, well, little bits of rules and regulations and orders do not appear very important. They certainly did not appear very important to me that evening. As I talked, an officer of higher rank came along, and he listened sympathetically, and he said that he would try to help. At 9 o'clock, approximately, that would be about 2 hours later, another group of soldiers arrived, and they took up their position outside the church to protect the area. They got into military formation and they charged down along these streets, charging the attackers. And the man in command, he shouted out an order, "Come out," he said to the assailants, "come out," he said, "with your hands up and we'll not shoot." But the command was answered by a litany of obscenities, punctuated with uncomplimentary references to the Pope and the Fenians and the British Tommies. Instead of coming out with their hands up, they shortly came out with guns blazing and petrol bombs being fired all over the place. More houses were set on fire, and at their approach, the soldiers turned and ran away. Now, I haven't heard, in spite of all this gunplay coming from that area, I certainly have not heard that on the following morning police tenders pulled up outside the houses of well-known leaders of the extreme Protestants, pulling men out of their beds and taking them into custody on the suspicion of their being in possession illegally of arms. I haven't heard that. And if you heard it, I'd be very interested if you'd come along and tell me. Because as far as I know, during 50 years of British rule in 6 counties of Ireland, that has never happened. Again, we are tempted to ask ourselves, was it perhaps people who were the legal possessors of firearms who did the shooting on this occasion? But that supposition is too dreadful to pursue it. After retreating, the military soon reformed their ranks. And they came down along these streets again. And they took up their positions, some on the Kashmir Road and some on Waterville Street. But undaunted by the military presence, the attackers came along again with their petrol bombs and systematically, I watched it from an upstairs window, systematically they went from door to door in Bombay Street, kicking in some doors, breaking some windows, and throwing petrol bombs into the houses. They stood outside the school, and in full view of the military, they broke the windows and threw bombs, fire bombs, into the premises, into the school. Now, men, do not for one moment think that I blame the military. I do not for one moment blame them. They had orders, and their orders on this particular night was, don't fire. So they told me afterwards, because I was amazed at the performance, and I asked them about it, and they told me their orders were not to fire. I do not blame these men who must act on their orders, but I certainly do blame the people who gave the information which resulted in the military getting that type of order. The people who supplied that information are the people who are responsible for most of the destruction done in Bombay Street and in the Clonard area. Obviously, these soldiers, they didn't know the area. They certainly didn't know they were dealing with ruthless men who had no regard whatsoever for human life or property, as they showed on this particular night, under my very eyes. Three times that school beside our monastery was set on fire. And 3 times our local boys went into that school, into the blazing school, and with bullets whistling all over the place, I was with them once in the school, and I didn't feel a bit brave. When you hear these bullets whistling all over the place, these lads went in there, and 3 times they fought the fire with extinguishers which they got from the monastery. They fought that fire and they put it out. And I must say I marveled at their bravery. Again and again these attackers came during the night and during the early hours of the morning. And outside the school, they chanted, encouraging each other, let's get the so-and-so school, let's get the so-and-so monastery. That was the cry during the night. Well, they failed. They did not completely destroy the school, although they did extensive damage to it. And they did not damage the monastery at all, although they did succeed in getting 1 firebomb into our backyard, within about a few feet from the back door. They did succeed on getting up onto a shed right beside the monastery with evil intent, of course. But they were repulsed. They failed in their evil design that night. But their failure, my dearest men, was not due to any protection given by the forces of law and order. And let that be recorded. Let it also be recorded that they failed because of the bravery of the local lads who, totally unprepared and ill-equipped, and comparatively speaking defenseless, fought against terrible odds and saved this area from complete destruction. Because you need have no doubt in your mind about it, that was the objective that night, complete destruction. Well, my dearest men, there's the story of the attack, savage, murderous attack made on the Clonard area during these days of madness. I gave you the story as I saw it because I knew you'd be interested. Now, a few more points before I finish. These were terrible days, my dearest men. But some good has already come from these attacks on our communities. For one thing, I have noticed that the various communities which were under attack are much more closely knit than ever before. You have young people and elderly people all closely knit together, and that's a grand thing, just like any good Christian community should be. Now, there's one danger, men, and I want you confraternity men to avoid this danger. Don't fall into this trap. Already I have heard people say, Father, I can never again act in a normal way with Protestants. That's a terrible thing to say. You might feel like that. That's understandable. But my dearest men, that's just being emotional. Now, let us think the thing out. The vast majority of Protestants are thoroughly ashamed of what has happened. And they wouldn't have hand act or part in it. Now, that is true. And we must realize that, and we must accept that. They are thoroughly ashamed of what has happened. So we mustn't allow hatred to spring up in our hearts for our Protestant brethren. You have, of course, the lunatic fringe amongst them. You have the extremists and you have their leaders. And you have the leaders of the so-called leaders of this little statelet which have done nothing at all to deal with those people. That is an abuse which we hope will be remedied. What we are aiming at now, my dearest men, is justice. No more, and certainly no less. Certainly no less, my dear men. That's one lesson we must learn from what has happened. We demand justice. We're not just begging it. We demand it. It's our right. And we'll keep on demanding it until we get it. We don't ask for any more. Just a fair deal. No discrimination in the matter of housing or jobs or voting power or anything else. Just a fair deal. That's all we ask. We don't ask for more. So I suggest that you pray, my dearest men, that soon we will have a community where everybody, irrespective of his religious beliefs or irrespective of his political ideology, will be able to lead a normal life and will not be unjustly discriminated against, as has happened so often during the past 50 years. So pray, my dearest men, let all of us pray that we will have a society where Catholics and Protestants can live as they should live together in peace, helping each other out as good neighbours should. We must live with each other. It is a mixed society. We must live with each other. But that does not mean that we are not going to demand justice. And we pray tonight that God will grant us this justice which is our due. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost, amen.
Many decades of reporting I've seen time and again in the Balkans, Afghanistan and in the Middle East how desperately difficult, dangerous and sometimes boring the job of the peacekeeper can be. This report from 1969 shows that for the British troops in Northern Ireland, keeping peace in your own country is an even more complex task, frustrating, unpredictable and often thankless. The British squaddy learned the hard way that he cannot be friends with everyone, and sometimes not with anybody. What was true for the troops was also true for us journalists. Reporting hostilities in your own backyard, it's impossible to achieve what both sides recognise as impartiality. In Protestant and Catholic quarters of Belfast, I remember being frequently taunted with demands that we tell the truth. But whose truth? As reporters learn as they covered the recent referendum in Scotland, unfairness is often in the eye of the beholder.
Belfast Shankill Road, where 4 weeks ago British subjects were shooting at British troops and the troops were shooting back. Sweeping up the debris has certainly not banished the memory of that battle between infantry and a Protestant mob, in which 3 men died and 60 were injured, including 22 soldiers with gunshot wounds. The bloodshed and the strict security measures that followed inevitably changed the relationship of the soldiers with the people of Belfast.
Before that actually happened, I found that the people on the street had no respect for our guns at all. You know, if you tried to move someone on with a weapon, you just push it straight out your hand. But now they know that if we've got reason, we will fire. They're a bit more wary of the guns now, and we don't get quite so much from people on street corners as a result of that Saturday night. I'm not sure it's a good thing or a bad thing.
It was disgraceful the way they carried on. Couldn't even bear the children talking to them. They must have been brainwashed when they were sent on to the Shankill Road, because no British troops would have got on like that. Well, there was no call, the brutality they used. And they left the butts of the gun on a pub over beside a bar where I live, where they beat the men against the door.
I think if we look upon this rather like Cyprus, there we had communal trouble between 2 peoples who were easily recognizable. You had your Turkish Cypriot and you had your Greek Cypriot. They were quite easily definable. But here in Ulster, the British soldier is dealing with his own countrymen, who all look alike and all speak alike. And it's very confusing for him. And it's very difficult for him to understand the bitterness and the tensions of the situation. It's particularly difficult for him to understand why these 2 factions want to destroy each other. And it's particularly difficult for him to understand why they want to shoot at him. And it's not generally known that over 1,000 rounds of ammunition from weapons of many different sorts were fired at the soldiers on the Shankill Road on the night of the 11th, 12th of October. It's a very large amount of ammunition fired in the streets. Now, in war, or in internal security operations overseas, a soldier would accept becoming a casualty from the enemy, and he wouldn't hold any hard feelings in his heart about it. But to be shot down by your own countrymen does lead to a very difficult situation and hard for the soldier to understand, and he doesn't take very kindly to it.
Nor does the British soldier take very kindly to any aspect of his bizarre duties in Belfast. Whether he's imposing a fragile truce along the barbed wire peace line that keeps the Catholic and Protestant communities from each other's throats, whether he's patrolling the streets night and day, or passing chilly hours on sentry duty, he has more than the fear of bullets and petrol bombs to contend with.
You go out on the street, and if you're in a Protestant area, you get their side of it drammed down you. And when you go to the Catholic area, you get their side of it drammed down you. You know, you hear both sides of the story every night, and I quite honestly get sick of listening to it. You know, I just close my ears and say yes, no. 9 times out of 10 they're drunk, the ones who come over and try and impress on you that one side are murdering bees and the other side are the same. You know, they're both the same. Well, I wouldn't have thought it had to be done in the UK, you know. In England, you sort of, there's no trouble like this. And then you come to Ulster, and you have to do it, you sort of think, well, I've done this before in other parts of the world, but not here, it's ridiculous. You know, you try and think what they're doing it for.
The soldiers certainly have plenty of time to ponder on Ulster's follies. Tall buildings make tempting perches for Belfast's amateur snipers, so the soldiers have occupied the rooftops, where they're alone with their thoughts and the pigeons. In a monastery overlooking the peace line, monks possibly meditate on Belfast's holy war, while overhead men of the Royal Hampshire Regiment keep a drafty vigil. When trouble comes, it's often after dark, when pubs discharge their customers filled with Dutch courage, and when those engaged in the traffic of arms are likely to seek the extra cover of darkness. So every night roadblocks go up. Regular searching of cars has yielded little, yet the army feels it must continue, partly to convince the extremists that the lid is still firmly on this turbulent city. But the public is already showing signs of irritation, and it is questionable how long these measures can continue without dangerous friction.
When trouble's all over, I mean, we're not going to be able to sort of walk around any Protestant areas, not freely, because at the moment they do hold some malice against us.
How do they show this malice?
Well, army out, Dad's army. I mean, just recently, the bricks and that, and things, we get more spitting from them now than we used to.
They spit at you?
Yeah, spitters in the street corner. But you have to take this because it's a part of the job. You know, it does get my back up personally quite a lot, but there's not much you can do about it because they're just there to provoke you, and if you let them see you provoke you, they're spitting us. They've got away with it, you know. It's just...
Police-army cooperation is essential in Belfast. In Catholic areas where the RUC is unwelcome, joint military and police patrols are restoring normality. The police could easily have resented the army presence, but according to most officers, this is not the case.
I, myself, am quite satisfied that we, as police, could not have carried on without the assistance of the military. And in that respect, I say that they were welcomed not only on the streets of Belfast, but also in our police stations. They think that this thing, as my Inspector General says, must be played softly, softly, and we are prepared to play it along as the situation demands. But I do not see the military being capable or allowed to go in the immediate future.
Everybody has said, and it has been said by a great many commentators, that the morale of the Royal Ulster Constabulary has taken a terrible pasting in the past year. Do you think it was further affected by bringing in the military?
Oh, on the contrary, I would say that the arrival of the military has helped to bring us back and regain some of the morale, which was at times rather low in the past.
At least the police morale is bolstered by the comforts of home when duty's done. Not so the soldier. In Belfast, home for 3,000 men is something like this. A camp bed in a hastily converted office, factory or warehouse. Everyone admits that accommodation is depressingly Spartan. But the troops have to be where the trouble is. And that's in the already overcrowded slums, where this is the only sort of shelter large enough to take their numbers. Sanitary and washing facilities are far from adequate, but at least the office buildings are reasonably warm. In a lofty warehouse where crates of detergent have made way for a company of infantry, they'd yet to overcome the heating problem. Of the 8,000 troops now in Ulster, 5,500 are reinforcements on a 4-month tour of duty. This rapid turnaround of units is putting a heavy strain on the Army's manpower resources. But everyone agrees that 4 months is quite long enough in conditions like this. These men of the 3rd Light Infantry bore the brunt of the recent shooting in the Shankill. Nowadays, there are hot meals when they can get to them. But in their isolated outposts, they frequently cook for themselves. It's the only answer. With a duty roster that demands 3 hours on and 3 hours off, or 3 on and 6 off night and day, there can be no set time for eating or for sleeping. When sleep is uncertain and often disturbed, the laconic message on the wall has a special significance.
As far as I'm concerned, the most important thing is to crash out and get a good night's conk before you go back on again. Otherwise you'll be on your chin strap. Well, it's not always that bad though, you know. It eases out in weekdays mainly. We're not quite so pushed, and we do get about 6 to 8 hours sleep.
What do you think of the living conditions you're in now?
Well, as you see for yourself, it's a bit pathetic, isn't it? Well, I think it is anyway.
Well, it's better than what we have had though, isn't it?
Oh yeah, worse, you know, it's a lot better than the floor, which we're sleeping on when we have to get out here. But even then, you know, you'd have thought they could have found something a bit more comfortable.
Have you ever done any job like this before? Any internal security jobs like this before?
Yeah.
You have?
Yeah.
Where was that?
In Mauritius.
How does this job compare with the job in Mauritius?
Well, it's just about the same, like, you know. It's sort of the same thing, like, it's over religious and all that.
Yeah.
And, it was a bit, well, I reckon it's a bit more rougher out in Mauritius, like, you know, than it was here. But it's just about the same. Really.
Were you in Mauritius?
Oh, yes, sir. There. Well, it was about the same, like, you know, and...
What about bullets flying? What is here?
Not so many bullets?
No. They did have the same sort of arms.
No, they didn't sing God Save the Queen when I was shooting at you there, did they?
Oh, black. Different colour, too.
Does it make any difference that you're doing this job amongst people who speak English and in a town which is a British town?
Oh, yeah, I mean, we're in Mauritius, you know, you'd have to care sort of thing, but we've been a different race. It never entered your mind so much as it does here. We bring British Isles, you know, your own sort of people, your own backyard. That's about the biggest dip, you know, it shook me when I first came out here to think what were happening in our own country, you know. Where if you go abroad, I mean, it doesn't take you so much.
How long do you think that you can go on doing this job, I mean, without getting really fed up with it?
Oh, we're fed up now.
Well, we'd like to go, well, I'd like to go home now. I'm fed up with it.
Do you think that if you moved out now that the situation would be all right, or?
No, I think it'd just go about the same again. It's still, you can still feel it in the air now, though. Even though it seems quiet, it's not really.
It's carrying for you, isn't it? I don't think any people such as yourselves would understand, you know, what's happening in this place if we lived here for 100 years. I know I wouldn't, because it's drilled into, you know, from being brought up from a child. Even the children over there, they know more about it than we do. You know, they'll come up to us and tell us what they want us to do and where they want us to go and why all this is happening, you know, and they know more than what we do.
When you came in the army, did you think that this was the kind of job you'd have to do?
No, if I knew, I wouldn't have joined. No, I joined to see the world, not to get shot at. I'm not saying I'm a coward, like.
To Second Lieutenant Nick Gaskell, commanding an infantry platoon in Belfast brings a special set of challenges.
I think the worst problem in this situation at present is boredom. Obviously the soldiers have been, in the same place, doing the same stags for a long time, and they get slightly fed up with it. And trying to keep them from being bored when you're actually come inside here and when they're resting is very, very difficult. And secondly, our problem, I think, is we get a lot of problems from home, which you can't obviously deal with, being over here. Marital problems, problems about hirings and flats. And we've had a lot of these, and a lot of them you've got to try and deal with them over the phone and over, with letters, rather than being able to go and see the people themselves.
Yeah. Considering that you have these two things to deal with, how do you think the morale of the platoon has been?
I think the morale is extremely high. There was obviously a period, a fortnight ago, where it went downhill slightly because there was nothing happening. The more that is happening, the blokes enjoy it more. They like to get out and they like to see it. They like to be where the trouble is. But when there is nothing happening, they obviously go downhill a bit. And this is the problem, trying to keep their morale up.
There's little that can compensate husbands for the separation from wives and children. But the Army Broadcasting Service does provide taped messages and record requests from families at home.
Hello, Dennis. How are you? I hope you're taking care of yourself. I wish you were home. We're all missing you here. Happy birthday on 26 when it comes. And Donald wants to say something, so just don't.
I don't know. Are you going to be first?
Hello, Daddy. I'm pleased to meet you at
Inevitably, the state of mind of the soldier in Ulster depends greatly on his relations with the local people. Army policy encourages off-duty fraternization, but forbids it on duty, without much success. Even if they wanted to, it's unlikely that the soldiers could discourage the young ladies of Belfast, who've apparently succumbed to the fascination of the uniform. However much it's frowned on by officers, a little flirtation must have supported morale more than anything they could have done. And the same goes for other unofficial contacts. When the troops first arrived, they were often overwhelmed with tea and sympathy. Cynics warned that it wouldn't last. But it has. Soldiers have suspected at times that Catholic and Protestant ladies were competing for their support with flasks of tea and coffee and soup and packets of cigarettes. But the picture can change quickly. In areas where troops recently fought Protestants, the flow of refreshments is only just recovering from a sharp decline.
Hello.
There you are, love. That's for after your lunch or after your dinner.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
I'm very pleased that they are here, really. Because if they hadn't been here, I wouldn't have been here for to run away somewhere out of the road. It was a terrible time we had those 2 nights. Terrible.
And you feel safer now this time?
Certainly, I do feel quite happy about it. Quite happy about it. I was up with the soldiers the first one Sunday morning. They were here, 5 o'clock in the morning.
Well, you went to see them?
I went up and gave them their tea, their breakfast.
Did you? Some people say that the soldiers haven't been very polite, that they've been rude to people.
No, I never found that, really. I did not.
Would you be, how would you feel if the soldiers went away? Would you think it's time they could go away yet?
Oh no, I wouldn't dream of going away. Not for a long time yet. You're never sure here now.
The children of Belfast have also accepted the soldiers on their streets without reservation.
Basically, kids on both sides for the soldiers, because it's sort of something new. I mean, to see a soldier standing at the street, I mean, not everyone in the world's got a soldier standing on his street. I mean, they feel quite chuffed with it, because they're a bit too young to understand why we're there. But they seem pleased enough we're there. Give them something to say hello to in the morning. I don't think they're scared of, they're not shy of us because they come up and talk to us, play around with our webbing. In fact, sometimes they're a nuisance, pulling us to bits.
At an official level, relations between the army and the public is now a top priority. Community relations projects are second only to security. Every commanding officer wants his unit to be more good neighbourly than the next. Men of 41 Commando Royal Marines are entertained by a Catholic Young Men's Association. The concert is a thank you gesture for improvements that the Marines made to a Catholic church hall. In East Belfast, where militant Protestant songs evidence a militant Protestant community, men of the 2nd Battalion, the Queen's Regiment, are building an adventure playground. Some soldiers resent adding this kind of work to their already heavy duties, but their company commander thinks it's worthwhile.
Well, when we first came into this area, there was, of course, a great deal of trouble between the Protestants and Catholics. And since the Catholics were in the minority, we automatically deployed to surround this minority. And the feeling has been, on the Protestant side, that the army had become partial towards the Catholics. And this has caused quite a lot of bitterness, resulting, of course, in the troubles that we've had in the recent past. We decided that the army is, of course, impartial, but it must show its impartiality. And I felt that the best way of doing this was to take on 1 or 2 projects like this to show people the goodwill.
Was this a playground before you started work on it?
Well, it was, but during the trouble times, of course, a lot of the kit that had been here was taken down and used for the barricades.
Yeah.
So when we came to see it, it was really a derelict area.
This playground is, I presume, used now only by Protestant children?
Yes, this is deep in the Protestant area, and of course, around in this particular area, the reaction to the army was distinctly unfavourable before we came.
Yeah.
But I'm delighted to say that things have changed dramatically now.
3 times a week, youngsters from the Shankill area invade a church hall to take boxing lessons from the men of the 1st Battalion of the Parachute Regiment.
You went to the ring, did you? Yeah. Oh, like this? Did you? Yeah. See, these ones here. Were you as good as that? Were you? Oh, I expect you might be as good as that.
The officer in charge of boxing is Captain Geoffrey Banks.
I think generally they're great youngsters, I honestly do. They're no different from any other children the world over. They've probably got an inbuilt aggressive attitude, the will to fight, something which you don't find in all youngsters. It's dominant here, definitely.
But do you think that surely there's enough aggressiveness around here without you encouraging it?
We don't want to encourage it, we want to channel it. We want to take the youngsters off the streets, put them into the buildings, and say, if you've got any surplus energy, if you want to take the air out of your lungs, this is the place to do it, and we'll encourage you to do it, here, and not in the streets.
That's the ball, that's it. That's the ball. And again. That's the one, and again. Keep them on, keep it on, right. That's it, come on. Try again. Left, right. Left, right again. Keep it on. That's the one.
The fighting in Belfast, as you know, and in Londonderry, has been amongst the poorer people and in the slum areas. Now, such people do need help, and there's much, I think, that the army could do to help them. We can do things for the children and the youth in particular, I'm sure, here, so that they can have a different attitude for the future, perhaps to live in harmony with each other. This is what we'd like to see. We can also do quite a lot for the grown-ups, I think, so that they can appreciate that this is their army and we are prepared to help them and to understand their problems.
Another of the Army's problems is security along the 120-mile border that Ulster has with the Republic of Ireland.
Hello, Tango 34 Alpha. This is Tango 3 Alpha. Set up a roadblock now at grid 972-415. Over.
No one seriously believes that Ulster is in danger of an invasion from across the border, but there is always the chance of a revival of the IRA's sabotage campaign that kept troops and police busy up here from 1956 to 62. And the border must be policed by someone, today by the men of the 17th 21st Lancers, patrolling in their ferret scout cars the scores of unapproved roads to and from the border. Many of these border duties were performed in the past by the B Specials, but in line with the recommendations of the Hunt Report, the Army has taken over. Not only is the Army, with its scout cars and helicopters, better equipped for border duties, it has replaced the politically controversial specials in an area which is politically sensitive. If the legislation to replace the B Specials goes through, the proposed Ulster Defence Regiment will be purely a reserve force, and border duties will remain with the regular army. These duties at present centre around the search for arms and keeping an eye on both the IRA and the Protestant militants of the UVF, both difficult if not impossible tasks. Though they think an arms race has been going on, the endless searches and roadblocks have yielded little evidence of it. Anyone wanting to import weapons would hardly drive them across in broad daylight. 120 miles of border and an even longer coastline offer more discreet avenues of approach. If the weapons are coming in, this is their destination, Belfast, where the soldiers have laid aside their rifles to fight on the Ulstermen's terms, with words.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like now to introduce you to the CEO of the Paratroop Regiment, and also some of his members, his fellow officers of his mess. I'd like you now to give them a hearty welcome into Shankill.
For Colonel Grey, a welcome from the ladies of the Shankill Defence Association, militantly Protestant and bitterly critical of British troops.
Ladies, I'm scared stiff tonight.
You should be.
I was delighted to be asked by you to come along and talk to you, really for two reasons. Firstly, to meet some of you and have a look and see what you look like. Because normally when I'm going round the parish of Shankill in my evening rounds, I see you either scrubbing your doorsteps or in curlers, and tonight I can see you've been, most of you have been round the hair shops in the Shankill. And it's great to see you looking so glamorous. That's not flattery either. It's difficult for soldiers in this sort of situation, as you can appreciate, and that's why we welcome your help. The soldiers are trained not in this sort of way. They're not trained to walk around the streets and be policemen. And therefore, it's when you see them going round the road in a sort of tactical formation, when you ask them to have a cup of tea, only one of them comes across to you. The other two stay on the side of the road. And when they ask you to turn your porch light off, in some occasions, as they have done when they're having a cup of tea, this is because I insist on them maintaining the battle disciplines which they are taught in normal everyday training, because this is the security we have to maintain. The reason for this, although you may say no one is going to shoot at you on the Shankill, which again many of you do, is because in discussion about the night of the shooting on the Shankill, many of you say to me, well, it wasn't anyone from this area. I can't be too sure. I don't want to have to write to ladies like yourself at home and say this is why your son has been killed or your husband, and I can't therefore take that risk. If someone is going to shoot at them, well, I want them to be prepared to get out of the way, and that is why we move around in a sort of tactical way around your streets. I'm really very pleased to be here to answer any questions you have. If you'd like to shoot them at me, please don't tear me apart.
I will put the question in an indirect way to you, sir. Would you order one of your men, not order one, but if one of your men told her to bring in our Union Jack, would he be then reprimanded by you in doing such a thing? Perhaps you could answer it that way.
I'll answer it another way. The straight answer is yes, he would be reprimanded. But I'll tell you what happened. One of the soldiers the other day, in the area of Morpeth Street, of my headquarters,
was being hounded by a lot of the children, and he had been all day. He'd been on sentry outside that building, and he was being called by the kids, and had been, again, I know this, for a long time, a Fenian bee. And he, as you know well enough, because I've watched you clip them round the air during the day, he stepped out of line and batted him round the air. He shouldn't have done that. The little boy went in and told his dad that this had happened, and immediately his dad came whistling down the road with a hammer. And that soldier was in England the next morning.
Well, sir, one of our questions has been prompted in my ear by one of the ladies that...
Yes, I did, yes, I gave you a straight answer. I would not order any soldiers. What the question he asked me was, would I reprimand the soldier if he did that? The answer is yes, I would. I go further. All my soldiers have strict orders not to even touch any Union Jacks.
God save our gracious Queen, long live our noble Queen, God save our Queen.
It could easily happen again. Protestant loyalists singing the national anthem one moment could be battling with British troops the next. The publication of the Hunt Report was the last flashpoint. In the months ahead, the Stormont's reform programme could provide others. The troops cannot leave the streets at present, and even when they do, they may yet have to return, as they have time and again for 100 years.
God bless her.
It does seem that perhaps the two communities in Belfast are relying on the troops now to act as a buffer between them. Don't you think there's a danger that when the troops are pulled out, that the gap between the two factions might be even wider?
Yes, I think this is a major problem. I'm well aware of it myself. Nobody likes having their protection removed, especially when it's provided free. It's very nice to live under protection and feel everything is all right. I think the timing of relaxing our security measures will be important. Obviously, the peace line is a critical part of the Belfast problem, and I think we've got to be careful how we relax on that. But we may have to take a chance, I think, about thinning out the soldiers and moving to a different type of peacekeeping operation, more perhaps by patrols and presence at critical periods like weekends or flashpoint dates, rather than being permanently on the streets.
If I should die, think only this of me, that there's some corner of a foreign field that is forever England. There shall be, in that rich earth, a richer dust concealed, dust whom England bore, shaped and made aware, gave once her flowers to love, her ways to roam, a body of England's, breathing English air, washed by the rivers, blessed by the sons of home. And think this heart, all evil shed away, a pulsing eternal mind no less, give somewhere back the thoughts by England given, her sight and sounds, dreams happy as a day, and laughter learned of friends and gentleness, in hearts at peace, under an English heaven.